I think that the subject of negotiations and what happens in terms of putting together contracts and reviewing contracts between the institutional investor and the general partner is a very, very important topic that sometimes doesn't get enough of an attention of an audience. But in the last 10 years, especially after the financial crisis, we've seen that a lot of the institutional investor community really cares about the topic of fees, costs, expenses, reviewing these items and making sure that they're optimal. That's one of the main topics that we're going to be discussing on our panel for SuperReturn. We're going to be talking about how LPs and GPs can come together to foster an environment of greater transparency. And this is, I think, critically important, and it's something that many of the industry bodies, including ILPA, really care about, as well as the SEC. They're looking to make sure that investors and their interests are sought after and are controlled, right? And effectively, the SEC and all of investors are looking to just safeguard our interests. And so one of the most important things around transparency is the ability for investors to understand what the performance is of the portfolios that they manage, and also to understand from the GP what fees, what expenses are being charged on top of that performance. And so really to understand what makes the difference between the gross and the net of their performance. That is something that cannot be underscored in terms of its importance, especially in this zero interest rate environment, right, where we have performance across the board, not just for alternative asset classes, but across the board, performance is coming down. Institutional investors are worried about how do we make ends meet, how do we actually perform to expectations. And so the one thing that institutional investors are doing and that we're talking about on this panel is introspection, understanding what are the terms and conditions that we agreed to in the LPA, and how do we make sure that there's contract adherence? How do we make sure that the LPA that we signed is followed to the T? How do we make sure that managers are giving us the appropriate information on a quarterly basis, if not more often, that help us understand and right-size what we are paying out to these managers? Not just the performance. Performance, we think, of course, it's standard. We think that institutional investors are always looking to find the best managers. But at the end of the day, it's understanding the contract and the adherence to the contracts of the LPA, understanding what they're paying, understanding how to right-size costs, how to right-size the expenses, making sure that everything is market standard as well. Because in many ways, if you think about institutional investors, the performance is really about the alpha that the managers generate, asset allocation, as well as the prudent management of the costs. So any basis point in cost savings is incredibly important, and as important as a basis point in performance.